Hello, my name is Lucas. I'm a principal program manager at Oracle Labs, which is a research and development organization within Oracle. And I'm also a developer in the team that develops the multilingual engine, MLE. Welcome to this learning session entitled Managing JavaScript Code with Oracle Database Multilingual Engine. So in this talk, when I say MLE, I don't mean the person Emily, but I actually mean multilingual engine. Let's talk about JavaScript and why it's so awesome. So first of all, JavaScript is very popular. It's widely used and it's common purpose. So JavaScript gets used in the client, so for writing code that runs in your web browser. It also gets used in frameworks like Node.js for writing server code. And with MLE, you can finally also execute JavaScript in the Oracle database. Next, JavaScript is open source. There is this repository website called NPM, which contains more than 1 million libraries available at your fingertip. So no need to reinvent the wheel or anything. If someone has solved the problem before you, just grab what they've done and reuse it. Third, JavaScript also comes with a huge ecosystem. So it's not only about developing the code, but you get an ecosystem to test your code, to deploy it. Once it's deployed, to debug it, or also to monitor how it's going. Taking all these 3 things together, you actually get pretty fast time to market. And first of all, because it's so popular, you're very likely to find developers that can write JavaScript code, and they can then make use of that open source to just take what they need and assemble new applications very quickly. Since Oracle Database 21c, which was this innovation release, you can now also execute JavaScript in the Oracle database. This is done with Multilingual Engine, or MLE for short, using GraalVM, which is another technology coming out of Oracle Labs. It's called Multilingual Engine because in the future, we envision to support many languages. Right now, we support JavaScript. In this 21c innovation release, we support ad hoc execution with a PL SQL package called DBMS MLE. So if you evaluate code with this, as you can see in this screenshot here, you have to provide the JavaScript program as a string, so as varchar2 or CLog. This also means you have to manage your code yourself. In Oracle Database 21c, we also worked together with the Apex team to get this fully integrated with Apex. Now, Apex always supported JavaScript, right? You can have, since a long time, JavaScript code for client-side logic. However, Apex also allows you to write server-side code. And when we say server-side in Apex, we actually mean code that gets executed in the database. So this is logic that happens when you click on a button, or validations that get executed, for example, before you insert something into the database. So far, when you had to write such server-side logic, you needed to write this in PL SQL or SQL. With Database 21c and ongoing, you have now the option to use JavaScript MLE to write your server-side logic in JavaScript. Now let's talk about the future and about what we envision past Oracle 21c to make the JavaScript experience even better. What I'm going to talk about is MLE code management, which allows us to develop entire JavaScript applications in the database. If we want to do that, there's a number of challenges that we need to tackle. First of all, managing code in the database means we need some way of persisting MLE code in the database. Secondly, we envision JavaScript not to be a replacement of PL SQL or SQL, but rather to complement those languages, such that you can write new code, maybe in JavaScript, and then combine it with the PL SQL code you already have in your database. So we have to tackle that and make sure this works perfectly well. Third, we can talk about JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So obviously, JSON and JavaScript are a very good match. In fact, JSON is nothing else but JavaScript objects. So let's see how we envision to tackle those three things. First of all, we want to integrate JavaScript with PL SQL and SQL. So what that means is that if you have a piece of PL SQL code, as you can see here, that contains a SQL statement, we want to call functions or procedures that are written in JavaScript just the very same way we would call them if they were written in PL SQL. So what you see here, so a package with a function is email. This is JavaScript, but you won't even realize. If you just see it like this, you would, in fact, not be able to tell the difference. The same thing here, where you are not calling it in a SQL statement, but as PL SQL, a PL SQL function, and here we see a PL SQL procedure. In fact, they are all written in JavaScript. We also need the other way around, and this is actually something that already works well in Oracle 21c. So if you write JavaScript code that should access SQL or PL SQL, you use this internal module called MLE Oracle DB, which is modeled after Node Oracle DB, which is the client-side driver for talking to an Oracle database from JavaScript code. But remember that in MLE, we are in the database, so we need our own driver. But it's very good if you have a similar API, because that means we can reuse code that was originally written for the client side. As you can see, if you have a connection object from this module, you can then execute, be it SQL code or be it PL SQL code. So this both work already today. Now, a third thing for perfect language integration is that we have to be able to call JavaScript from JavaScript. So if you have one piece of JavaScript, you want to use it in another piece of JavaScript, as you can see here. So here we import the isEmail function from a module called validator and use it in this piece of JavaScript code down here. Next, I will show you how we envision to persist code in the database. And we envision this to be something we call MLE modules. So we will have new syntax for creating such a module, create or replace MLE module, just the same way as you would do create or replace table. We give it a name, and we say which language, which for now is bound to JavaScript only, and then the whole implementation of the module in JavaScript, and a delimiter in the end to say we're done. Now, if you're a good JavaScript coder, you can, of course, write all this JavaScript yourself. But as I pointed out earlier already, there's a lot of JavaScript code out there already. So you don't necessarily need to write all this JavaScript code yourself. You can just import it from open source. The JavaScript code in here follows the ECMAScript 6 standard for JavaScript modules. That means you can have internal functions that are just used within the module itself. And you can also have functions that get exported and which have an export keyword here, like this isEmail function, which returns something in the end. So since it returns something in the end, it can be exposed as a PL SQL function. When we look at this JavaScript function, print valid emails, it doesn't return anything. In JavaScript, it's still called a function, because in JavaScript, functions and procedures are both called functions. But on the PL SQL side, you would then expose this as a PL SQL procedure. So given such a module, let's now look at how you would make them available to PL SQL. We use create or replace function, the same syntax that you would use to create a PL SQL function. Also, you give it a PL SQL name, and you give it the arguments with Oracle database types. You say the type of the return value as well. What is new here is as MLE module, to say that we don't provide a PL SQL implementation of this function here, but rather we reference the MLE module called validator mod. And then we also need a signature clause to tell MLE which function in the module it should call. So in this case, it should call the isEmail function, and it should take the varchar2 Oracle data type and transform it into a JavaScript string. It's optional to provide those types, because MLE has a default mapping for mapping Oracle types to JavaScript types and vice versa. But if you want to override this, you have the option of specifying types here. For procedure, it looks very similar, just there's no return clause, obviously. And again, you say which module, you say which function in that module. And now, once you have this function and this procedure, you can use them. By the way, again, if you use open source, you can actually generate those signatures for you. Because many of these open source modules, they come with an associated TypeScript module. And from this, you can then conclude how these function headers have to look like. Now, if you have this, we can call this. So for instance, in a SQL statement, in a select statement, you can use this. Or you can also use the PL SQL procedure from PL SQL, for instance. Last but not least, I said we want to be able to call JavaScript from JavaScript. And I just put here the example again as a reference. Now, if you wanted to execute this in MLE, MLE needs to know what validator means here. And for this, we proposed a new concept called an environment, or env. So you do create or replace MLE env, you give the environment a name, and then you can add a number of imports. So imports are really just a mapping between a name, validator in this case, and the actual module that it refers to. So validator mod in our case. Once you have that environment, you can then use it in your call signature. So this time, we not only say MLE module and give a signature, but we also say which environment should be used, such that when MLE executes this function here, this procedure, it knows how to resolve validator in here. Again, I want to stress the point, you can write this yourself or generate it from open source. Now let's see a first demo of how this is working in practice. So what we see here is Apex, and it is a special Apex prototype which includes MLE as we envision it to be in the future, and it is fully integrated with Apex. So what we see on this screen here is Apex object browser, and if you go here, you see that you not only have the usual tables, views, and so on, but down here you have MLE environments and MLE modules. So let us start this demonstration by showing how you can create an MLE module simply by uploading a file that you downloaded before from open source, for instance. So let's do that. Let's give this module a name. And then we have a version field, which is not mandatory, but it's good practice, such that we can keep track of which version of open source we actually uploaded. So we uploaded this from this file here, which I downloaded previously. And here we are. So down here, we now see the whole source code of that module that just got imported. Now we actually want to be able to call this validator module from SQL. And in order to do that, we go to SQL commands, and we create a call signature for this. So let me show you how this works. So we go to PL SQL here, and we use this VML function that I just talked about a minute ago, where we reference a validator module here, and we give the signature. We say we want to call the JavaScript function isEmail, which takes a string as an input. So let's run this. Now this function got created, and now we can actually do this here. We can use this function in a select statement, for instance. And what we see here is now we got a 1. So this is actually a correct email address. We can not only use this in a select statement, but wherever in a SQL statement we want. So we can also, select all employees that have an invalid email address, which would be 0. Right. And now we see that, Miller actually has an invalid email address, which is correct because if you look here, this is not a valid email address. We could also, of course, filter by email addresses that are valid, and it would basically get all the other employees in the employee table. So since having modules is so nicely, right, I just got this from open source. Let's just create another one by going back to the object browser and just clicking on the plus symbol again here, searching for MLE module, and then create one that is called Sentiment. I got this one from open source as well, to be precise. This is basically how it's looking on NPM. You see, well, 8,000 weekly downloads, and you could get the ECMAScript module for this from a content delivery network like this one. So I did download this before, so now I can just upload it again. So let me go to this other directory where I have the sentiment module. And as you can imagine how the name says, it is capable of analyzing sentiments. So to find out whether some sentence is positive or negative or neutral. So let's go back to SQL commands. And let me run some JavaScript code. So in SQL commands, as with MLE, we can execute JavaScript directly. So we don't necessarily have to write SQL or PL code, but we can also call JavaScript code from JavaScript code. And that's what we do here. So we use this module called sentiment. We just import it. And then we have a couple of messages that we would like to analyze, these three, and we run them in a for loop and call the analyze function. Now, what happens here if we click on run is we will get an error, right? Because this sentiment module cannot be loaded. Why can it not be loaded? Well, MLE doesn't know yet how to map this name here to a module. And in order to do that, we will need an environment, because the environment is what tells us how to resolve such module names. So what we do is we go back to the object browser, and this time we create an environment. We call this just the basic environment. So let's create that. And now for an environment, we actually have to add imports. So let's add an import here. Let's give the import a name. We said we have to call it sentiment. Sorry, the name is actually here. And the module name we can select from the drop-down menu, and actually, happens to have the same name, which is very convenient. Now we can go back and apply the changes. So save that environment. And when we now go back to the SQL command, trying again to execute our JavaScript statement, you see this environment drop down here. So we select the basic environment, which now tells us that sentiment actually refers the sentiment module. So if you now run this, we see cats are stupid is a negative sentiment, MLE is awesome, +4 is a positive statement, this is neutral, so 0. Let me just show you yet another module just to show you how quickly you can develop applications by just reusing code from open source, right? So let's create yet another module, which is called QR code generator. And as you can imagine, this is used to create QR codes, right? You can, of course, if you think about Apex, you can always create QR codes in the browser using browser-side JavaScript. However, you might want to include a QR code generator. You might need this if you want to include a QR code in an email, for instance, right? Which is then server-side, and server-side in Apex means in the database. So let's create that module. Let's call it QR code generator. And now if we want to use this from JavaScript, let's say, we have to update our environment to also properly understand QR code now. So to properly resolve this module. So let's just add another import here for QR code generator. We call it QR code generator. And we just apply the changes. Now, I would like to see this QR code generator here in a little application. So when we have oracle.com, I can click create here, and I would see the QR code here. Functionality is not implemented yet, so let's go to page 4, and let's put in the code that is actually needed for this. So here is the process, here's the logic that gets executed when you click on this button, and here is the code. So what we want to do is we want to use the QR code module. Then, we create a new QR code with some specific options we call make, and then we store this in the page item in Apex. So this is the field where the QR code will be displayed. As you can see, before MLE here, you didn't even have the language option. Now you can choose between PL, SQL, and JavaScript. Let's save this. Let's run this. So unfortunately, this still doesn't work, still gives us an error. Again, it tells us it cannot load the module. And you guessed why, the same reason than before. We didn't specify which environment should be used. Now here, we don't have an environment option, but instead what we can do is we can go to shared components and to security attributes, and then look at the database session. And here we can actually specify the environment that should be used, in all server-side logic, in JavaScript snippets that are server-side logic. So now if we play this again, hopefully this time it will actually create a QR code. And here we go. So that's that. We have seen how we create modules. When we want to call modules from other JavaScript code, we need an environment. So we saw how we create environments, and we have seen how we can really quickly develop new application or application pages by using open source. So now let's talk about JSON. JSON and JavaScript are really a great match. If you import JSON as a JavaScript object, you can then use stuff like dot notation, bracket notation. You can use built-in JSON functionality like stringify. And you can also create JSON objects really easily in a function that should return JSON, right? Because all you have to create is a JavaScript object. Now let's see this as well in a quick demo. So we are here back again at the MLE Apex prototype instance, and we want to do something with JSON. So let us first create a table called JSON docs that should contain JSON documents. And each document is identified by a name, and it has some content which itself is JSON. So this is really the native JSON data type that was introduced in Oracle Database 21C. Now, for whatever reason, this didn't work the first time, but the second time it did. Okay, now, next thing is we want to create an MLE module that does something with JSON, because we want to insert some data into this table, right? And I want to do this as easy as possible. So I create a module, this time using the create or replace MLE module syntax. I export one JavaScript function called getTestJSONDoc, and all it returns is literally a JavaScript object, right? Keeping in mind that JavaScript objects and JSON are just the same. So when I run this, I should get my module. And now if I want to call it from SQL, I need to create the call signature, as we have seen in the previous demo. So I run this, got created, and now I can use this function called getTestJSONDoc to insert this test document into the JSON docs table. And I'll call it events.json, since this document is about events. One row inserted, we should be good. If we want to double check, we just go to the object browser and we go to this JSON docs table and we go to data here and we see, yes, events.json is there and the content is this one. So that's just this example document that I just created using a JavaScript object. And in order to demonstrate what we can do with this, let's write some more JavaScript code here. And let's again use the basic environment, because I will also make use of a module, an MLE module. This module is called Mustache. It's another module that you can download from NPM. And Mustache can render JSON documents in a so-called template, right? So this here is the template It contains start date and location, and those are basically the items in that template that get filled from the JSON document. What we can also see in this example is that I use the MLE.js OracleDB SQL driver to retrieve the data from the JSON table. So I get, the content of the JSON document from the doc table, given this name. That's how I retrieve it. So this will give me one row, one column result. So I can take the first row and the first column within that row, which basically gives me the JSON document. And then within that JSON document, there is an object called conferences. And then I can basically just loop through this conferences object, which will give me all the conference names. And for each conference name, I then print this information using the Mustache renderer. So if we execute this example, we'll get some information here, which shows us that Java 1 and Oracle CloudWorld both have a start date of October 17 and are happening at the CSIS Forum and the Venetian. With that, we've seen JavaScript, objects, and JSON are really the same, which is super convenient. What is even more convenient is that we can expose this functionality now also as a RESTful service. In order to do that, let us extend our existing module just a bit and add some imports there, the Mustache module and the SQL driver, and then let us write a second function that can then render the JSON result. In the end, we stringify it, since we'll need eventually a string out of this JSON. Now, if we go to SQL commands, we can create a call specification for this again, using the basic env again. And we have to use PL SQL for that, obviously. Okay, so this function was created, and now I can actually go to RESTful services. I have already created a get endpoint here, which doesn't have a lot of code in here. So here I actually now have to include my PL SQL function that in fact is an MLE function. I call it, I apply that change. I copy the URL of this GET request. And if we are lucky, we see this in the browser. Yes, we are. All right, let's summarize what we've seen today. We have seen MLE modules, which you can use to persist your JavaScript code in the database. We've also seen a new construct called MLE Envs, or MLE Environments, which help you resolve JavaScript code should you use it from other JavaScript code or from other MLE code in general in the future, when hopefully MLE will have more languages. We've also seen that JSON and JavaScript are really a perfect match. So JSON, together with JavaScript and RESTful services, is really a great offering, I believe. Thank you very much for attending today's session. I'm very interested to get your feedback, comments, questions about this, so don't hesitate to reach out and send me an email. Thank you very much.